the height of the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union are locked in a nuclear standoff.
We can't even recreate the terror and the fear that existed at that time.
In October 1957, the Soviets stunned the world by orbiting the first Earth satellite, Sputnik.
July 1st marks the beginning of one of the great scientific adventures of our time, the International Geophysical Year.
In July 1955, Eisenhower announces the U.S. will launch a scientific satellite as part of IGY. Within days, the Soviet Union announces it too will launch a scientific satellite during IGY. The CIA is getting information from U-2 spy planes photographing Russia, a stopgap measure until reconnaissance satellites are ready. In August, the Soviets announced they have successfully flown the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, a rocket capable of delivering a nuclear bomb halfway across the planet. The Russian engineer responsible for the Soviet ICBM, the father of the Soviet space program, is Sergei Korolev. On October 4th, 1957, Korolev's plan is set in motion. Sputnik, the world's first satellite, reaches orbit. As Korolev predicted, amateur radio operators all around the world track the signal and confirm what the Soviets have done.
Just a few days after Sputnik was launched, Donald Quarles from the Department of Defense is in the Oval Office talking to Eisenhower, and one of the points that he makes is that he thinks that the Soviets have done us a good turn. They had established a precedent of overflight, exactly what Eisenhower wanted to do initially, and now the Soviets had done it for us.
But the public doesn't care about legal precedents. All they know is that the Soviets have beaten the US to a major technical milestone. Four weeks later, a second Russian satellite, Sputnik 2, carrying a live dog. The strong public reaction forces the administration's hand. Now the von Braun JPL team gets permission to try and launch their satellite, named Explorer. Von Braun promises to get it done by the end of January. At the same time, the Vanguard team is also under pressure, preparing to launch their satellite.
3, 2, 1, 0, ignition.
Eight weeks after Sputnik 1, December 6, 1957, on live television, Vanguard rises a few feet, loses power, and explodes. By late January 1958, the von Braun team is ready with Explorer. The rocket is the Jupiter C, a modified Redstone with extra stages added. The upper stages are built by JPL, as is the satellite, which contains scientific instruments designed by James Van Allen of the University of Iowa.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire command, fire command.
Shortly before midnight on January 31st, 1958, the Jupiter C lifts off, carrying the Explorer satellite. Four months after Sputnik, America has its own satellite in orbit. In 1958, Eisenhower creates a new civilian agency to run America's space program, NASA. But for those who lived through the fall of 1957, Sputnik will always have a deeper, more profound meaning.
For the first time ever, we leave this planet, we go into Earth orbit with a human-made object, and that signals the beginning of a new era, a new age, which we call the space age.
Project Mercury raced to beat the Russians in placing a man in space. On May 5, 1961, Alan B. Shepard, Jr. became the first American to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Three weeks after, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin successfully reached Earth orbit. Three years later, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space, 20 years before Sally Ride stepped onto the space shuttle. During the turbulent 1960s, milestones in space exploration were Soviet victories. The first interplanetary probe, Venera 1, 1961, and the first spacewalk, Alexei Leonov, 1965. Perpetually one step behind the Russians in public perception, America leapt ahead by setting the goal of placing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. July 20th, 1969, the world held its breath as astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped from the lunar module Eagle onto the surface of the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. By the mid-1970s, the Apollo-Soyuz joint U.S.-Soviet project slowed the fierce competition, spelling a new era of cooperation that would continue to grow, making the exploration of space a universal triumph. The International Space Station and the Space Shuttle program became multinational, looking beyond national competition to the betterment of all humanity.
We're just orbital engage, departure clearance for you. Copy 260-319-2 at 13.2K. Thanks a lot.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
And put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition, and may God's love be with you.
I'd like to fly all the way to the end of the route, and then direction home 1,400 feet, still looking very good. 2,000 feet, 2,000 feet,
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to lead the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
3, 2, engine sequence start. 1, 0, launch commit. We have a liftoff. All engines building up thrust. Moving out. Clear the tower.